can hand over now to Jack Dromey, who's one of our shadow ministers in the Department for Communities and Local Government.
That's fine, thank you. Well, thank you very much, friends, and first of all, welcome. Wish we were meeting in different circumstances. Just in terms of my own history, I think, as some of you will know, before I was elected in May of last year, I was a union man. But when I was a lay activist, I was not only Secretary of the Trades Council, I was Secretary of the Tenants and Residents Federation, and I brought together the group that formed the second community law centre in Britain, in Brent. And it's still going strong to this day. When I say strong, as I'll say in just one moment, like everyone else here, with the funding being threatened for the future. And I know from my experience what a remarkable impact the Law Centre had in Brent on causes great and small, but all causes that deeply mattered. And there are communities and citizens in Brent whose lives have been immeasurably improved as a consequence of what's been 30 years of the Brent Community Law Centre. Now, more recently, since I've been elected, I've been deeply involved, together with the voluntary sector in Birmingham, in the fight to protect our Citizens Advice Bureau and our advice services. On the Citizens Advice Bureau, we've made progress. It is finally yet to be concluded, but we've had an excellent campaign. We've driven both the Council and the Government onto the defensive. An interim arrangement has been arrived at, and indications have been given that a lasting settlement will now be agreed. We'll see. We're keeping the pressure up, and I'm leading a delegation of Birmingham's 8 Labour MPs to meet with Nick Hurd, I think it's next week, so that we ensure that that is finally and fully concluded. We're moving on next to the 13 advice centres in Birmingham facing closure, and we welcome very much the campaign that they're running, which we will wholeheartedly support, including their very welcome judicial review, which has been mounted against a grotesque failure to consult and properly to take into account the implications by the Council of its actions. Now, why are we here? Well, to make the obvious point, it's because the main focus is local government. Incidentally, the problems are not local government alone in terms of cutback in budgets. There's also, of course, the whole issue of cutback in legal aid. But in local government, 28% cuts. In Birmingham alone, 212 million, the biggest cut in local government history in the next financial year, with devastating consequences for public service delivery more generally and for advice to the community in particular. And this is a government that talks the language of localism. Well, it's a bizarre combination of localism and Leninism on the part of Eric Pickles, this command decisions in relation to 28%, but then localising the blame by saying it's the councils who make the decision, go and talk to them and blame them. And it's utter, blatant hypocrisy. How can you talk the language of the big society, at the heart of which is what you represent, all that's best in society, and then to deprive you of the financial support you need? Now, crucially, it's what we do. And I want to just build upon what my colleagues have said, plus what I've heard by way of some excellent contributions tonight. Now, it's how we make out the case which is both, it's moral, unashamedly a moral case, the economic case, the public service case, and the big society case for the protection of the invaluable role that you perform in the communities from which you come. Now, crucially, in terms of developing that case, I absolutely agree with Karen, is that what we need are powerful case studies on a continuing basis that bring alive what the human impact has been and will be. Has been, on the one hand, people whose lives have been transformed for the better as a consequence of what you've done. In other words, we want good news stories. So, like the tremendous story you told us tonight, good news stories of good people facing difficult circumstances, whose lives have been changed, transformed for the better as a consequence of the support that you receive. But we then need, on the other hand, the bad news stories, what's already starting to feed through, and what will happen big time at the next stages if you deprive communities of the support that you represent. Crucially, again, the point that Karen and others have made, which is the false economy argument. That if you cut back on early intervention, ultimately what the impact is, not just in human terms, but in terms of cost to the public purse. I think in addition, what we need to do is to develop other avenues of approach, ranging from, on the one hand, if you cut back the advice services, I'll tell you one thing that will happen. You'll have MPs' offices flooded by people who will otherwise historically have gone to advice services. But on the other hand, let me tell you what I was told by a very senior officer in the West Midlands Police. He said, Jack, our fear is that if the fabric of community support and including the fabric of advice goes to the community, then people will turn, and it's already happening, he said, people will turn to that which they know, and they're getting 999 calls now from desperate people not knowing what to do in the most desperate of circumstances, and the last thing the police want to do is to have to pick up the consequences of advice services eroding in areas like Birmingham and nationwide. Now, crucially then, in terms of the context within which we argue this, it is in part, unashamedly, about the big society. I prefer to use the language of the good society, which I and you have been part of all my life. And incidentally, history tells us that good society and good government are partners, not opposites, because the role of government in supporting the good society is absolutely key. But also, I agree with the point made by Advice UK in terms of the role that you play. If what we want to do, and quite genuinely, is to see service to the community improved, public service delivery to the community improved, the role that you play in being a critical friend of public service, based upon the experience that you have in terms of the cases that come into you. Now, if I can just say two things in conclusion. It is therefore making out that powerful case on a continuing basis. But it's also about two other things. Is that there is quite simply going to be a cost to the public purse. You can argue about the scale and extent of that, but there's going to be a cost to the public purse. But it's a cost that unless we pay that price, there will be catastrophic consequences for the very social fabric of our country. And I think the other point I want to make is not that I need to encourage you, because I know many of you here tonight, not that I need to encourage you, but I think our friends from Oxford, in their contribution, made the case very well, is that it's not just what we do up here, it's what you do down there. And crucially, it is about the campaigns you mount locally, the pressure you put on elected councillors and members of Parliament. It's a great national movement to say no, and we will be 101% behind you.